I'm Bob again, reporting on a fundamental factual error in the mainstream media's reporting on Attorney General Jeff Sessions' Senate confirmation hearing. The heart of the story alleges that Sessions lied, or may have lied, when questioned January 10th by Minnesota Senator Al Franken. In part one of this series, we'll focus on three primary reports. The first is a transcript from a March 2nd factcheck.org post by Robert Farley titled, "Did Sessions Lie?" with the word lie in quotes. In the 1-minute edition of part one, I focused on factcheck.org, but I'm not trying to pick on them. Here's a graphic of three online reports. Each of these is a screen scrape, an image of part of the source website, including formatting, fonts, and highlights like bold type. Both factcheck.org and politifact.org feature written transcripts of Sessions' answers, and the words are identical. The Washington Post article has Sessions' words in quotes, but the Post's quoted words don't match the factcheck and the PolitiFact transcripts. The Post appears to shorten "and I didn't have, did not have" into "and I did not have." Based on the traditional standards for accurate reporting, either the Washington Post's quote is inaccurate, or the fact-check and PolitiFact transcripts are inaccurate, or, as I believe this video proves, they're all inaccurate. However, considering more generally the meaning of words and phrases, the fact-check and PolitiFact transcripts and the Post quotes are all consistent. They all say the same basic thing, so we'll take them as a lump. Basic source documents for an avalanche of news, leaving us with what's become conventional wisdom: Sessions lied. I don't know of any news report from anyone else that claims the actual exact words Sessions spoke when he answered Franken's question differ fundamentally from these three accounts. If you find one, please let me know. We'll focus now on the fact-check PolitiFact rendering of Sessions' key statement. And I did not have communications with the Russians. But did Sessions say that? Did he actually say those exact words? Of course, we've got the video, so that should be easy to answer, right? Well, we'll see. We'll try anyway. Let's start with a full wind-up, a minute and a half of Franken questioning Sessions, including that key statement. This gives us some helpful background. Here we go.
CNN has just published a story, and I'm telling you this about a news story that's just been published. I'm not expecting you to know whether or not it's true or not, but CNN just published a story alleging that the intelligence community provided documents to the president-elect last week that included information that, quote, Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. These documents also allegedly stated, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Now again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so you know. But if it's true, it's obviously extremely serious. And if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Very well.
A clearly articulated is omitted in the transcript. We'll briefly consider that later, but it doesn't change the meaning of the words. Regarding the actual words spoken, I'm only challenging 2 words of the fact-check PolitiFact transcript. For the rest of this video, we'll be painstakingly, laboriously investigating these 2 words. But first, we should bring to mind an awareness that there are major differences between written and spoken language. Two differences are important here. First, when speaking, we sometimes give emphasis by repeating a phrase, either with identical words or similar words. You may have noticed that President Trump does this a lot. Second, we all know that when people talk with no script, sometimes we start to say one thing, then we start over and say something else. Of course, when we misstate something, the second correcting phrase must have a different meaning. It often has the opposite meaning. Now let's look at a modified fact-check PolitiFact transcript. The first phrase, "and I didn't have," is unchanged, but I challenge the second phrase, so it has two brief bursts of question marks representing the two challenged words, followed by the word "have," which I don't challenge. Here's our first test. We'll play the clip, including the challenged words, twice, with our revised transcript for the key section. Please ask yourself, just tentatively, for the challenged phrase, does it sound like Sessions is restating something for emphasis, or does it sound like he may have started to say one thing and then started over to say something else? Those are the only two possibilities I can think of. Let me know if you think of another one. Here we go.
I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
At this point, I'm trying to encourage you to open your mind and your ears to what's going on here. On now to our first enhancement. I'll play the same brief clip at half speed with an adjustment to keep the pitch the same so it doesn't sound like this. We'll do this twice. Here we go.
I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Now let's consider what those two question mark words might be if Sessions was starting over to say something different, either to correct a misstatement or for some other reason. Since the first phrase was "and I didn't have," one logical possibility for those two mystery words would be "and I have." If Sessions had made a misstatement, this would make sense because the correcting phrase has an opposite meaning. But the crucial issue is what those words sound like to us. We'll hear this twice.
And I did not have.
Now we're going to play the same clip at the same speed with the same pitch adjustment, but this time we'll be inside video editing software, and we'll be looking at just the phrase with the two disputed words. You can watch this bar move along the graphic of the audio as the tape plays. We'll also add a bobagain.com transcript, an alternative fact transcript if you will, that renders the challenge phrase as "and I have." We'll hear this twice.
And I did not have. And I did not have.
Finally, we're at the rock bottom of this deep data dive. We'll run the same clip, same enhancements, same 3 syllables, but we'll pause briefly between each syllable. We'll hear this twice. Let's now focus on 2 questions for each challenged word. First, can the challenged word be the word from the fact-check PolitiFact transcripts? Here's the first one, and we'll play it twice. So, was that word did, or was that some other word? I hope you agree that whatever it is, it can't possibly be the word did. Therefore, for this word, the fact-check PolitiFact transcript is wrong. On to the second word, and we'll play it twice. Was that word not, or was it some other word? Again, I hope you agree that whatever it is, that word can't possibly be the word not. Therefore, for this word, the fact-check PolitiFact transcript is also wrong. Let's now pause to consider our situation. The fact-check PolitiFact transcript is clearly unmistakably wrong for both of the challenged words. Therefore, at an absolute rock-bottom minimum, factcheck.org and politifact.org and the Washington Post must retract and correct their reports to show something like this. And I didn't have, two disputed words, have communications with the Russians. Clearly, such a rendering can't possibly be a basis for concluding that Sessions lied. Therefore, at an absolute minimum, factcheck.org and politifact.org must retract their original reports. But they certainly could still report that further investigation may be needed to determine, if possible, what those two words are. The Washington Post must make a similar retraction and correction. However, as we'll see, I think these organizations all can and should go further than that. Of the two challenged words, I think the second one is the easiest to decipher. We'll play it twice. This word sounds clearly to me to be the word I. Of course, the word I matches the alternative fact bobagain.com transcript. We're going to add one final step here. We'll play the same clip, same speed, same pitch adjustment, but we'll listen to the two words I have together. This kind of puts the word I in context a little bit, making it easier to hear as part of the phrase I have. We'll also do this twice.
I have.
I submit at this point that we have another piece to our puzzle. On to the final word, which we'll also play twice. As it stands alone, this word is more difficult to positively identify than the other words. As we see from this highly stretched out section of the audio track, there is a rise toward the end of the word. There may be some kind of blending between the word and the word I. There could also be some kind of additional articulation, since our mouths and tongues don't always form words perfectly. But fortunately, this is the last piece of our puzzle, and we know it has to be something. We're now going to do what we did before, only this time we're listening to all three words, again for context. We'll do this twice. Based on what we've heard, including with all three words together, I think it's fair to say that we can declare this last piece to be the word and, based on a preponderance of evidence standard. Of course, earlier in this video, I suggested that even with video evidence of Sessions' testimony, there might be some surprising difficulty in determining the exact words that he spoke. Assuming that we do succeed in setting the record straight about Sessions' testimony, I hope one of the lasting contributions of this investigation I'm launching will be greater caution on the part of the media, and fact-checkers in particular, when reporting on what someone said, even with video or audio recordings. The process of rendering spoken speech into a written transcript can be challenging, and the consequences to someone's reputation can be severe if a major mistake is made and then widely propagated. Unfortunately, I think that's what has happened here. We've now eliminated the possibility that the disputed words of the fact-check PolitiFact transcripts could be right. We've also seen and heard what I think is a convincing case for the alternative fact bobagain transcript. Can further analysis advance us in our effort to determine definitively what Sessions said? I think so. A careful analysis of the wider meaning of the exchange provides additional support for the bobagain transcript. Let's start by listening again to the full wind-up for Franken's question.
CNN has just published a story, and I'm telling you this about a news story that's just been published. I'm not expecting you to know whether or not it's true or not, but CNN just published a story alleging that the intelligence community provided documents to the president-elect last week that included information that, quote, Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. These documents also allegedly stated, quote, there was a continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government. Now, again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so, you know. But if it's true, it's obviously extremely serious. And if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Very well.
Before going further, I want to emphasize that Franken acknowledged this was a breaking story and that Sessions may have been hearing about it for the first time. Franken later said he was hoping that Sessions would answer by saying he would recuse himself.
Senator Al Franken joins us now live. Senator, do you accept that explanation from the Attorney General?
Not really, because in between the revelation that he answered my question in what would at best be an extremely misleading way, his office had said that he had he had met with the Russian ambassador, but he didn't have any recollection of what the content of the discussion was. And so so now we have a third iteration of this, which is I didn't discuss anything about the campaign. Well, first it is I didn't meet with any Russians. Second, then it's I met with the Russian ambassador, but I don't remember what we discussed. And then it's these charges are terrible that I met with the Russian ambassador and discussed the campaign. We didn't discuss the campaign. These are all contradictory. I had simply asked him, what would he do if he had learned that other members of the campaign had met with the Russians, hoping he would say he would recuse himself.
I can't help but make two parenthetical points here. First, Franken made a false statement, quote, I had simply asked him, what would he do if he had learned that other members of the campaign had met with the Russians, end quote. But as we've seen, the question wasn't limited to other members of the campaign. Sessions was within the scope of the question, and Sessions clearly picked up on that in his answer. Second, Franken's answer includes an example of one of the possibilities we've been considering. At one point, Franken started to say one thing, then corrected himself.
His office had said that he had he had met with the Russian ambassador, but he didn't have any recollection of what the content of the discussion was.
I'm not faulting Senator Franken for this, just pointing out that this really is something that happens frequently when people speak without a script. As we'll see later, but not in part one, there is a dispute as to whether this was a gotcha question. But Franken was clearly prepared for a more cautious response, given the breaking news character of his question.
And I'm telling you this about a news story that's just been published. I'm not expecting you to know whether or not it's true or not. But now again, I'm telling you this as it's coming out, so, you know.
Focusing now on the question itself, there are three pieces to it. First, who are we talking about? The answer is...
And if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign...
Second, what activity is at issue? The answer is...
communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign.
The third element is the simple question, what will you do? If the answer to the first two questions is yes, then presumably at a minimum some kind of investigation would be called for. Before dissecting it, let's listen first to Sessions' full answer, then we'll listen to what now Attorney General Sessions said about Senator Franken's question at a March 2nd, 2017 news conference.
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Very well.
I was taken aback a little bit about this brand new information, this allegation that surrogates, and I had been called a surrogate for Donald Trump, had been meeting continuously with Russian officials, and that's what it struck me very hard, and that's what I focused my answer on. And in retrospect, I should have slowed down and said, but I did meet one Russian official a couple of times. That would be the ambassador. Thank you all. Take care.
Now we'll dissect Sessions' answer one piece at a time. Sessions appears to be falling back on his legal training. Step one is to get the main facts out on the table. His first comment suggested that regarding others with the Trump campaign, he didn't know of any such activity.
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities.
Of course, that really doesn't go directly to the question, what will you do, if there was such activity? But Sessions' recounting indicates that he was taken aback by Franken's question. From this first comment, we do learn that with respect to anyone else, Franken's question was for Sessions a hypothetical question. Sessions then noted that as a surrogate, he himself was within the scope of Franken's question.
I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign.
Again, we can see this as another step in a lawyerly process of getting the facts out on the table. Here comes the final piece, and what has emerged is the crucial statement. As we've seen, Sessions then said, and I didn't have.
And I didn't have.
At that point, we know there are two possible scenarios. First, Sessions may have started his answer thinking that because the campaign didn't emerge as a topic in any communications he had with the Russians, he should simply say that. This would be a logical way to start, at least partly because Sessions was clearly in a defensive frame of mind. Franken speculated that this was in fact what Sessions may have been thinking.
But he made a bold statement that during the campaign he had not met with the Russians. That's not true. Whether he in his head thought that he was answering whether he had talked to any Russians about the campaign, then he should have said so. He should have said, I met with the Russian ambassador a couple times, but we didn't discuss the campaign.
As Franken himself suggested, if this scenario is right, Sessions might have been en route to saying something like, and I didn't have any communication about the campaign with the Russians. But Franken made it clear that his question to Sessions was more preliminary. Might an investigation be needed? Franken wasn't looking for or asking for any preliminary defense offered by Sessions. Again, falling back on his legal training, get the facts on the table, Sessions realized the preliminary character of Franken's question. It was about whether communication had occurred. It wasn't about what might have been discussed. Following the logic of this scenario, Sessions started over, continuing to get the facts on the table, and addressed Franken's actual question directly by saying, and I have communications with the Russians.
And I did not have communications with the Russians.
For this scenario, although Sessions spoke in the present tense, I think there's a clear implication that because the communication was ongoing, the time span included the time frame of the campaign. Scenario 2 is Sessions may simply have misspoken, saying first, and I didn't have, and then correcting himself by saying, and I have. Of course, we can never know how Sessions may have completed his first thought, but we don't really need to know that, because for either scenario, at that point, right after Sessions said, and I didn't have, and I have communications with the Russians, Sessions had completed his process of getting the facts out on the table. A momentary allowed Sessions a little time to gather his thoughts and consider the situation. He had clearly been presented with a possible need for an investigation of something that he himself had been involved with. Franken was prepared to accept a cautious response. On the one hand, as more information emerged about this breaking story, it was possible that there would be no need or basis for Sessions to recuse himself. On the other hand, he could always recuse himself at a later time. Sessions chose a cautious course and completed his answer by saying, and I'm unable to comment on it.
And I'm unable to comment on it.
Very well.
Of course, Sessions did later recuse himself. Here's the grand conclusion that I draw from all of this. Based on the alternative fact bobagain transcript, the entirety of the answer that Sessions actually spoke makes perfect sense. Here's the crucial, vital point. He did not lie. His testimony was factual and truthful. Could he have done a better job of answering? Sure. Franken suggested he could have, should have done a better job, and Sessions acknowledged he could have done a better job. But the fundamental question at issue isn't whether Sessions' answer was perfect or optimal, but whether it was either A, truthful and accurate, or B, factually wrong, possibly a deliberate lie, and possible perjury. For the scenario in the alternative fact transcript just described, Sessions' answer, including the phrase, and I have communications with the Russians,
And I have communications with the Russians.
is ultimately a true statement, albeit after some kind of a mid-sentence do-over. In summary, the underlying logic of this bigger picture analysis of the exchange between Franken and Sessions supports the claim that the alternative fact bobagain transcript is the correct rendering. That's my overarching conclusion from this analysis. I think the burden of proof is now on Senator Franken and the news organizations on our graphic here to establish that their version of the facts as to what Attorney General Sessions said at the hearing is correct. I'm reporting that my bobagain.com transcript is correct as to the disputed words. That's a wrap for the long-form version of Part 1. In Part 2, I plan to look at a question that has been frequently posed to me: if the avalanche of news reporting equivalent to the fact-check, PolitiFact, and Washington Post accounts has been factually wrong regarding what Sessions actually said, why hasn't Sessions been aggressively challenging those widespread and false reports of his alleged testimony at his confirmation hearing? To find out more about this series, visit www.bobagain.com.